Welcome to my hot radio room in Rockland, California. I'd like to spend time after I upload a video to respond to comments in another video so that others get a chance to see them pretty easily. To that end, I'm going to try and experiment and go through some of the comments in this last video regarding RG8X and see if we can come to a conclusion. Some of the comments made are spectacular. There isn't really a bad one in the bunch. They're all asking good questions or have got some great comments to make. I'm going to use that computer screen. I've got 4 I can look at. The reason for that is my cataracts is getting worse, and as I wait for I'm waiting to get on a list of people who are ready for the cataract surgery, which reminds me I've got to start taking a certain medication here. I better order that stuff now. So I hope in a week to get on the list. As I understand, the list is filled up to September. So in the meantime, I've blown up the comments to a huge font so I can read them, and I put it in front of me. A lot of the comments about I took RG8X, I pumped in 1500 watts, the Coax heated up pretty darn quickly, and comments were made about because of the way it was coiled. What it is, I took one off the shelf, it's brand new, so I didn't stretch it out. So let's see what some people had to say. James Hunter wrote, is it because Coax is coiled, which is not a normal situation? Jim, I'll disagree with you just a bit. You say that coiling the Coax or having the Coax coiled is not normal. I disagree with that. I think it is normal. A lot of guys might buy a 100-foot length of Coax and leave the excess coiled up in the thought that, well, someday if I move the antenna, I don't want to cut the Coax. Ward wrote, hello Jim, I did not watch your video. And his answer to the question about whether or not RG8X can handle 1500 watts, he says, no, it can't. You may push it through, but the dielectric will rapidly become resistive and not reactive. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? This will cause eventual failure. Remember carbon conductors. Yeah, I've recently turned something to carbon. I love your videos. Thanks, Ward. Nice to hear from you. I think Ward was licensed about the same time I was. Lynn wrote, thanks for your video, Jim. I've been interested to do a comparison between RG8X and LMR 400. Well, we know which one's going to win. Another option occurred to me, but you would have to use a fixed power input, and that would be to check the power going into the Coax versus exiting. I've done that a number of times. Then compare the losses between RG8X, RG8, LMR 400. I have done that, and pretty much if the SW, well, there are calculators online where you can put in all the parameters, including the SWR. So you put the power in, the SWR, which is key, the length of the Coax, the kind of Coax, the frequency, and this calculator will generate a result. And I found that calculator, it's on one of the manufacturer's websites, to be accurate unless the Coax is really old, or if the Coax has gotten water into it. If water has migrated into the Coax, all bets are off. That stuff is really lossy. Now, if the Coax is really lossy, what does that mean? Well, you probably heard a guy on the air say, geez, my noise level is low. I can operate anywhere on the band. The SWR is 1-to-1. I've got great coax. You likely have really lousy coax because it's suspicious. Unless you're loading into a dummy load, the SWR should change a bit as you tune up and down the band. Here's one from DK5ONV. Technically, he's pretty competent. He said, Jim, we had 102 degrees Fahrenheit yesterday, which would be about 40 degrees C, and about 50% humidity, which is not good. I wouldn't suggest putting more than 500 watts PEP into RG8X. And I would agree with that. I would set the limit there. James Bowen wrote, I would think with the coiled up would induce some heat while creating a magnetic field. Okay, currents, in theory, currents flowing on the inside of the shield. I think if you coil a wire, it has to induce some magnetic field. As to whether or not that's significant, I sort of don't think so. But it's an excellent question, and for that I'm grateful that you posed it. And James, you may be right. JW4ZXT wrote, best doing everything in LMR for 400. Great coax. Here's another guy, Buzzsaw. Being coiled can make a big difference, I would think. However, over a conversion, it can heat up, but when up and rolled up, how much? I would not test it. Not sure what that is. Being coiled up can make a big difference, I would think anyway. However, over a conversion, it can heat up, but when up and coiled up, how much? I would not tell. I'm afraid I don't understand that one. KV5R, always writes good things. 1500 watts at 50 ohms, 5.5 amps, I squared R. So I squared times R, and he solved it. The answer is 5.5 amps. If you don't know the answer and you've got a number like 5.5 amps, let's go to 6 amps. 6 amps squared, 36, 50 ohms, 1800 watts. So he's right on, of course. 274 volts. 8X center conductor is 16 AWG and can easily handle 5.5 amps. However, and this is important, and I did the test with a 1-to-1 SWR. However, that's only at or near a 1-to-1 SWR where it's 50 ohms and J equals 0. So R is 50, J is 0. J would be the reactance. At high SWR, say a jumper from a tuner to a choke, a feed line, non-resonant antenna of some kind, it will surely melt the foam, polyethylene dielectric, short it out. I've done that at 750 watts. If a high current, low Z, antinode appears to land on it, that will happen in one or more places in the band. So if you look at the coax cable and stretch it out, and you've got these points with, as he writes, you're going to have some points where there's really high current, high voltage, and at some point it's going to ruin the coax, and it may ruin it in several locations. And I did that recently with the amp. A problem occurred, and it just destroyed some stuff. and it did it in bizarre places based upon how the voltage and current divided. He goes on to say that Times Microwave lists LMR 240 as average power 1.5 kW. But that's a different coax. He goes on to read, right, and I think he's, let's see, I think 1500 watts. However, using RG8X as a long run to an antenna is not good. The loss at 30 megahertz for 100 feet is 2.2 dB. Add in a little bit less, you've given up half your power in the coax. Why do that? dB here, dB there, another dB, and it really adds up. Everett Dirksen. That's how old I am. A couple of these I read and I'm not sure what they're saying. Nice test. Another great video. Oh, well, he wants me to try some of the coax and blow it up. Well, I sort of blew up my amp, so I don't want to do it. John wrote, I have run 1500 watts through RG8X. Wasn't coiled up, handled just fine. Maybe. Just fine. I just think it's not a good choice. Arthur, thanks for the information, but let's see, but then what cable do we use for jumpers? For 50, well, LMR 400, RG213, RG8. I'm in Wasilla, Alaska. I think from there you can see Russia. Remember that? No summer heat so far. I don't know. Ron Stark wrote, is that a 100-foot coil? Yes. May want to consider putting marks on the cable with a highlighter to refine your comparison. Well, okay. Thanks. That's a good idea. That's why we use LMR 400. Paul Phillips wrote, most of us do more receiving than transmitting. Okay. Fair enough. If you're just receiving, but do you really want to give up at 30 megahertz 2.2 dB if you're really searching out receiving? And the answer to that is probably not a good thing. A guy wrote, have you deciphered the FCC's radiation exposure? I have not, and I've got to do that. Something James wrote, thanks for doing the test. The only thing I can it is hot in here. Thanks for doing the test. The only thing I can criticize in your test, misspelled, is that you have coiled up. In essence, you have created a heating element out of the coax. Okay, why? Why would that be any different than stretched out? And he's saying stretch it out and use a contact temperature probe to pick up the temperature. Those are good ideas, and somebody else wrote that he agrees with them. Look, if it heated up that fast, you might stretch out that coax, but you also might form a choke balun at the end where you coil up 10 turns. You might have 20 feet left over and you leave it as a coil. I just don't think it is a good argument for using coax because I coiled it up. About as accurate as a PCR test. Have no idea what that means. PCR, I'll have to go look. Thomas writes, great video, Jim. Makes me wonder if I was contesting or just rag chewing, let's say 15 minutes, how hot, it got hot quick. The answer to the question is it got hot quick. I didn't clip out time. Here's another one. Testing with SSB only at 1500 PEP with a crest factor of, the average power is surely less than 700 watts. Use FM to melt it. Well, okay. Also, the delta in temperature, 60 degrees C, is a lot of electronic parts can get to 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 60 degrees C, and that's true. But I'll get back to the question: do you really want to heat up the coax? And where is that heat coming from? It's RF. Why is that an issue? Because you're converting your RF into heat instead of radiating it. You want to send it out. Justin wrote, you made it easy on the coax using SSB. That's true. With no carrier, the only time it's getting max watts is when you talk loudly. Still, then, if you looked at, did I have the scope? I didn't have the scope up. If you look at the pattern, as far as duty cycle goes, I don't think I got anywhere beyond 50%. AM or digital would have done a number. Jack Kobe wrote, hey Jim, if the coax was not coiled up, would the temperature dissipate faster? Probably, and that's a good point. Should have used FM, this guy wrote. One guy wrote, because it was not a real test. Okay. Javier wrote, hi Jim, so is it safe to assume that the better coax for HF at much power would be regular RG8 then? Yes. If that would, if so, would you be willing to do that test? I could pretty easily, and likely the RG8X is not going to heat up. And again, let's go back to that coil. Did the coil make a difference? Based upon what I just read, probably. Is it significant? I don't think so. What if the SWR had been 2-to-1 at the far end? What if I had hooked up two dummy loads and had a 25 ohm impedance and the SWR was 2-to-1? That coax would have really heated up. Would RG8 heat up that way? No. RG8 can handle 3 kW. Another point to make, and I'll make this the final one about RG8X. As far as I know, there is no specification for RG8X that stands in any place. In other words, if LMR 400 is made by Times Microwave, there are other companies that make a very similar coax, and the standards that they use to make the copy oftentimes are just as good as the Times Microwave are just as good as the LMR 400. Or if you buy RG213 from a reputable dealer and you buy it AES, HRO, DX Engineering, wherever. It may be a different manufacturer, but there is a standard, a specification for that coax, and likely it's going to be about the same. Could you get cheated and it wasn't as good? Sure. So LMR 400, if you've ever looked at an RG58, usually the shield on it is really good, and it's a good looking coax. Yeah, it's low power, but it's a good looking coax. the point is, RG8X can come from a number of sources, from a number of countries, and the quality of it's going to be all over the place. Not so much with the bigger diameter coax. So my advice is stick with the larger stuff from a reputable dealer, so that when you buy it, if you get it from DX Engineering, you know you're getting decent coax, that you're not being sold stuff that's just junk. Finish with a real quick comment. I was in a contest in the 1970s, and I bought some from Radio Shack, and it was RG8 at that time, and I had it stretched through the garage and to the antenna, and I was on 40 meters for this contest running full power, and I could smell the coax melting as I proceeded to operate during this contest. Picked up the coax, it was hotter than blazes. So I'd gotten cheated on the coax. It wasn't what it was supposed to be. I bought it from what should have been a reputable dealer. It was not. When I stripped back the jacket and looked at the coax, it was garbage. And unfortunately, a lot of times you buy coax and it has connectors already on it, and you don't know what you're getting. It's another reason to put on your own connectors. You can look at the coax before you put on the connectors. And oftentimes the connectors installed by some companies is not very good. If you need somebody to install connectors, you want to get coax. There's a company in Texas that just is, they make the best cables ever, and I'll be happy to provide their name and address or contact if you need to have cables made. They're not inexpensive, but they make a really good cable. All right, that's, I think, a good response to some of the issues that were brought up. Next video that I'm working on right now, and I hope to upload it in the next day or two, is setting mic gain, which again is difficult for some folks to get lined up. 73, I'm Jim W6LG. Thanks for watching in my not so easily read. It is blurry as all get out. Both eyes are at a scale of 1 to 5 at a 4, and it's really tough to read. All right, 73. Thanks for watching. See you the next time. Before you go, for those who stuck to the end, how would you like to participate in a YouTube video where we do a Zoom, and I get 10 people lined up or something, and we do a Zoom. There's a light down here, it's the shadow. We do a Zoom call, and you participate. You've got to have a good connection. If your connection is lousy, it's not going to work. Good video, good audio, no room echo, just really good at your end and my end. And I get like 10 guys lined up. If there's some interesting questions that, a lot of things I don't know about, I can bring in an expert. So I may ask you for the question. In fact, I think I should. If you want to participate in a Zoom video, send your question and what you have for being able to get onto the internet and participate in a Zoom video. I think that would be an interesting way to do kind of a question and answer thing. Also, as I watch my friend W7HU do live streaming on the air, and I'm going to try to get him to help me do that. He does it so well, as does YB0 AR Ferry, and some other guys, and one guy in particular in the Netherlands. So I'm going to try to do some live feeds streaming as I'm on the air on 20 meters, and I'll call CQ and see what happens, if I can get it figured out. All right, 73, thanks for watching to the end. We'll see you then.